Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 310. I'm the co-host Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing very well. And since we were last on the show, it's been a couple weeks, just, my scheduling and traveling and things like that. It's been hard to get together, but you've written some articles for news.antiwar.com, which is really exciting. So, joining myself and Dave DeCamp, doing some writing there, as well as at the Libertarian Institute, as always. So, Connor, happy to have you back on the show. Today, we're talking about Iran. We got a lot of news to catch up on over the past couple of weeks. It seems that the EU has thrown together a last-ditch effort, and maybe, just maybe, we'll see the Iran deal saved. So I'm sure you'll break that all down for us. Just want to remind the audience that they could really help out the show by sharing it. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute, on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. Up anywhere you can listen to audio podcast. You can find the show or donate to the show at Patreon Subscribe and then you can donate crypto, all that information in the show notes page. And you can also support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. Connor, what are your favorite products at Paloma Verde?
So I actually just got something new, and I'm just going to verify the name really quick. It is... So let's see. So I think it might even be on sale right now, but I got the full spectrum unflavored CBD tincture, and it's absolutely terrific. It's got a little bit, got less than 0.3% of THC in it. And it provides a little bit more of like a full spectrum kind of effect as indicated by the name, but it works very well for me. And I also really like the soft gels as always. I mean, you take those after a meal, they hit you in like a half hour. Any kind of inflammation, any kind of fatigue you got going on, it's going to help. And the gummy bears are always delicious. Those will hit you instantly. They're a little too good. Sometimes I run through them a little quickly and then I have to get more. But I do also recommend the ones you get for your dogs. Those dog treats are great. My dog really seems to enjoy them as she gets older. Helps her get calmed down a little bit with any kind of anxiety. She's scared of like the storms sometimes we get here out in Phoenix. And so that really helps. And also with her joints. But there's so much good stuff over there. I recommend everybody go out and check it out. And they got a sale right now. So scroll through that. It's at the ad's at the top of the page, I think.
Right on. Just remember, you use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. That will save you 20% and get the show a kickback. So me and Connor could do this thing bigger and better. All right, Connor, let's start off with some news. First up here, the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was a top official in Al-Qaeda. I guess, for the past, since Osama bin Laden was killed, he's been the leader of Al-Qaeda. Although, I think from all the analysis I read, he really wasn't doing, any actual operations. It's not like he's planning the next 9/11 or anything like that. He's been hiding out in the mountains and in the tribal areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan for the last 10 years or so, is what people believe. He was 71 years old, and then the U.S. claims that they were able to take him out in a drone strike in an upper class area of Kabul, and that he's been there for some time. So, Connor, I think our audience probably is very skeptical, like us, of the U.S. government. And there's a lot of questions here. There's no DNA proof. And so for people who say we don't know that he's dead, you're right. That is a question that we should keep open. From what I could tell, there's been no admission from the Al-Qaeda side that this is the case. And so for now, I will say that I'm only about 90% sure that he was taken out. Although, as big of a deal the U.S. made about this, you would imagine that they're pretty sure that he's dead. It would be a massive embarrassment, of course, for the Biden administration if he comes out with the video and turns out to be alive or something like that. Now, the other possibility, Connor, worth considering is that maybe the guy died a couple years ago and the U.S. feels pretty sure that they could fire off a drone in downtown Kabul, claim they killed somebody, and then, say it was Zawahiri. And he can't make a statement saying that he's still alive, since he's actually dead and has been for some time. There's been reports for years and years he's been killed. And as he's been living in caves of Afghanistan and an old man, it wouldn't be surprising if, he did die somehow out there, and then they're just claiming success. So all these I do think are possibilities worth considering, but let's just assume, Connor, and I do think it's probably the case that he was killed in this drone strike. I guess the first point, to make is that, this was a very bad person, and it's not like the world isn't better without him gone. That being said, there are consequences to consider whenever you carry out drone strikes in populated areas. The U.S. claims that only he was killed in this strike, which seems questionable to me how they would know that at this point, since they didn't have anybody on the ground, were unable to collect DNA evidence. I read an article in the Washington Post that went over some of the details of why the Biden administration was sure that Zawahiri was in Kabul at the time, and they said that his wife and members of his family were there. And so the speculation, I don't think this has been officially confirmed, is that the U.S. used a Hellfire missile, but one without any kind of explosive on it, but rather it deploys, I believe, sits essentially sword blades, and those are used, and I guess that with the combined size of the missile will hit somebody and shred them up pretty good, and that's what happened here. But if somebody else was in that building, it's very possible that they would have gotten killed by it too. Now they say he was hanging out on his balcony, and so this is another huge question mark that I have in all of this, Connor, is this guy has spent years and years and years hiding for his life in some of the worst places on earth. And now he moves into downtown Kabul, and he's chilling on his balcony long enough for the U.S. and the CIA to identify him. It seems that his priorities really shifted in how comfortable he was. And that, it's not to say that maybe the Taliban, I think, is what most people imagine, is the Taliban put forward that, hey, it's, you have our security now, you go hang out in downtown Kabul, you got nothing to worry about. Look, this guy knows that the CIA operates everywhere, and that if he's hanging out on his balcony, it's honestly surprising to me they'd send an agent and just to, take a shot at him or something like that, Connor. And so I kind of wonder if either he was maybe set up by the Taliban, or that he maybe was dying, like, old man with cancer or something like that, and is, just wants to spend some time on his balcony in downtown Kabul, knowing full well that any moment could be his last. But, he's coughing up blood every time he goes into the back room. He doesn't really get along with his wife anymore, so what does he have left to live for anyways? Maybe that's the situation here. But if you looked at some of the reporting on Afghanistan in July, the State Department made an announcement that they did not want the Taliban government violently overthrown. And so if you look at the timeline here, the CIA was confident that Zawahiri was in Kabul in the spring, right? And so then months later, the administration, and I'm pretty sure this is after the White House is having conversations on what to do about Zawahiri, the CIA has told them. Then the State Department comes out and said they don't want the Taliban overthrown. It's not, I guess, 100% confirmed, Connor, that at the time the State Department would have known Zawahiri was there, but it seems like they probably would have. And so this raises some question marks for me, if maybe Zawahiri wasn't either set up by the Taliban, or the Taliban just kind of gave the U.S. a green light on this. Now, the Taliban have come out and said that, we denounced this and it was a violation of the Dawa agreement. But at the same time, it's not like the Taliban have or really could do anything about it. And look, if maybe there's a backroom deal here, the Taliban, I think, would come out and make public statements against it while having different opinions. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of question marks here, Connor, and there's a lot of possibilities on what happened here. But if you actually just look at the actions the U.S. has taken, it's not like the Biden administration, the White House, is coming out and making a huge deal about how, oh, this is proof that the Taliban are still allied with Al-Qaeda, or the Haqqani network is still allied with Al-Qaeda, or anything like that. Connor, I want to move on and talk about this great article that Dan McKnight wrote for the Libertarian Institute. And I went through, I think, all the possibilities of what actually, could possibly have happened here. But assuming what the White House said is generally correct, McKnight kind of goes through and says what this means. He said, the title of the article, "We Killed the Last Justification for the Global War on Terror." He writes, "There was a satisfying victory, not just for our soldiers and veterans, but for all Americans. 1 week ago, it was announced that the U.S. government had assassinated Ayman al-Zawahiri, who, along with Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, were the key players behind the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The butcher in New York City was killed in a CIA drone strike while on his apartment balcony in Kabul, Afghanistan. The Biden administration maintains there were no civilian deaths. There are 3 important lessons. Before turning towards international terrorism, Dr. Zawahiri was an Egyptian surgeon who was tortured by the U.S. ally Hosni Mubarak following the assassination of Anwar Sadat by the group Egyptian Jihad in 1981. Zawahiri wanted revenge, and alongside Osama bin Laden decided the only way to overthrow the Middle Eastern dictators like Mubarak was by striking the United States, which provided money, weapons, and international protection to these regimes. Zawahiri appears to have arrived in Kabul following the completion of the Taliban takeover. He was the guest of the Haqqani Network, a Taliban allied group who were some of the bitterest and hardest fighting foes of the U.S. military during the occupation, but it didn't start out that way. After the initial American invasion in October 2001, Haqqani, the leader of the group, was satisfied to stay at home and uninvolved in the war between Uncle Sam and the Taliban. That was until an adversarial warlord convinced the U.S. government to take his side in a local dispute with the Haqqani Network. Following airstrikes on Haqqani's home, killing a family, and a local school, killing over 30 children, and a convoy carrying many tribal elders, his network became a threat to our soldiers until the day we withdrew. And so, these are just, McKnight goes on, his article is very good. I recommend reading the whole thing. But, he just points out that this never should have happened in the first place and a few of the reasons why. I also want to go over why we're talking about Afghanistan here. A new article from Reuters by Idris Ali and Joshua Lande. And it says, Reuters reports the White House has failed to investigate the American failures in Afghanistan. As the United States marks its first anniversary of the withdrawal this month, some U.S. officials and experts say President Joe Biden's administration has moved on without properly assessing lessons from the 20-year war and the Taliban victory. Officials across the government steeled themselves for intense public scrutiny into how America's longest war ended in shambles with the Taliban retaking power. This is a quote from John Sopko, who is the Inspector General for the Afghan War. "We need to open up about that ugly history book called The 20 Years in Afghanistan and see why it failed." And then these are just a couple more quotes from the Reuters article. "These lessons are especially crucial to how the administration pumps billions of dollars of assistance into its fight against Russia," Sopko told Reuters. And there's that great article and documentary by CBS News saying that only 30 to 40% of the weapons are actually reaching the front lines in Ukraine. An unnamed official said, "We're going to have to take a black eye on our performance over the past year. And I have struck that much of Washington appears keen to essentially put Afghan in the rear view and try to move on." And so that seems to be the kind of the status quo of any kind of investigation or looking into what happened in Afghanistan for the past 20 years, Connor. There is going to be Sopko and others who maybe made some effort to investigate, but my guess is that we're just going to get small trickles of information. All the real scandals are going to be covered up, and that's about it. So, Connor, before we move on to Iran stuff, I want to take a minute here to talk about this 3-day bombing campaign Israel had in Gaza. Now, I believe that, this is a pretty interesting story in that most of the fighting unfolds between Islamic Jihad and the Israeli government without as much involvement from Hamas. So a ceasefire took place. This was Sunday, August 8th, that ended the 3-day fighting. Israel began its operation labeled Breaking Dawn on Friday. So far, Israel airstrikes killed several members of Islamic Jihad, but a bunch of civilians were also killed. I think now the total number is 46, is the highest I've read, about half of them being civilians. At the time I put this together, 15 of those killed were children. Now there's been a 16th that have been killed. 5 of the children killed were boys that were gathered at a cemetery, according to the report for Middle East Eye. Hours before the ceasefire came into force, a string of suspected Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip killed 9 Palestinian children and wounded many others. In one blast, 5 boys aged between 5 years old and 14 were killed while they sat next to their grandfather's grave in the Fallujah cemetery in northern Gaza, according to eyewitness Mohammed Sami. In another airstrike, a civilian car was hit, killing at least 1 person. Yet another airstrike killed 3 children, all siblings from the Al-Nabin family, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. The Gaza Health Ministry is also warning that there is a critical shortage of essential medicines and medical import, and a worsening fuel crisis that is putting the lives of people in Gaza at risk. This is from the Gaza Health Ministry. The healthcare system in the Gaza Strip suffers from chronic shortages, averaging 40% in essential medicines, 32% in medical disposables, and 60% in laboratory and blood banks. The Israeli Occupation Authority has prevented the entry of medical and diagnostic equipment and spare parts into the Gaza Strip. This action aims to tighten the grip on the Gaza patients who are in dire need of oxygen, diagnostic tests, especially those in the ICU. Gaza's sole power plant shut down on Saturday after running out of fuel needed to run generators in hospitals, worsening an already chronic power crisis that interrupts the delivery of life-saving medications in the Gaza Strip. And so, Connor, we have the bombing campaign, we have this health crisis, and the situation in Gaza is just absolutely deplorable right now. There's very little positive that could be said. Roger Waters was reading a Mondo Weiss article and breaks down in tears. Some of the stuff that Gideon Levy has been writing for Haaretz has been really powerful and important, and so there's a lot of good things that we could read on this latest bombing campaign, but it's like most of the others, it seems. I mean, this one was shorter, so only 4 dozen people dying seems like a very dark and bleak thing to say, but the last bombing campaign before this one, a couple hundred people died. So in a way, this was a little bit scaled down, but it's the same thing as we always see. Thousands of Palestinians displaced, homes destroyed by airstrikes, people terrorized, and of course it's because Israel maintains this apartheid system over the Palestinians. Now, there's one article that I highly recommend people read on this, just because it's a unique perspective. I don't see this analysis with so many other bombing campaigns, and so maybe this is a good time to look at and talk to it. It's by Elise Swain and Alice Sperry at The Intercept, titled "Americans Rarely See the True Face of Israel's Bombing of Gaza." And so what they talk about in this article, Connor, and why I think is so important, is that we get very sanitized images when we talk about Israel bombing Gaza. It's usually a building with black smoke rising behind it, or a picture of the Gaza Strip with it's like just a giant refugee camp with black smoke rising out, or maybe like a destroyed building with kids sitting next to it or something like that. But you never see the dead body of children really in American media when it's the Palestinian children. Now, if it's happening in the Ukraine and unfolding there, of course they're going to show you the bodies of the dead children in particular, but we don't get that with Gaza. And it's something to consider, how powerful these kind of things could be. And, especially the name Emmett Till is back in the news in America. And so one of the things that people point out that was so powerful about his death was, them the open casket that his mother elected to go with. And so the fact that the American media doesn't show the death of the children to the American people done by American weapons and things like that is very problematic. So anyways, Connor, that's everything I had on Israel, and I'll let you go ahead with some Iran news.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we have okay, so this is going back to toward the end of last month. So from July 24th, we have a story here from Dave DeCamp and antiwar.com. Iran says it foiled Israel-linked attacks on Iranian sites. And of course, this follows, a string of assassinations that went on in Iran that we covered. They probably killed something like 6 people, mostly connected to the IRGC and to the aerospace industry in the country. And there were drone strikes as well, including on a military site a few dozen miles southeast, I believe, of Tehran, the Parchin military complex, where they killed an engineer. So now, and there's a little bit more here because, so first of all, Tehran's intelligence ministry said that they arrested a network of agents who intended to conduct attacks against sensitive sites and predetermined targets inside Iran. The ministry has accused the network of connections to Mossad. The network is said to have been caught as they crossed into the country from the Iraqi Kurdistan region. This network, according to the ministry said in a statement, according to Al Jazeera, quote, this network's members were in contact with Israel's Mossad spy agency through a neighboring country and entered Iran from Iraq's Kurdistan region with advanced equipment and strong explosives. Iran hasn't revealed the targeted sites, the nationality of the would-be attackers, nor how many suspects they arrested. The ministry's statement merely said that members of the network plan to carry out unprecedented terrorist activities in some sensitive locations and predetermined targets. Something I picked up in another article in Times of Israel was that some Iranian media reports say that the suspects were about to carry out a bomb attack on a sensitive site in Isfahan. And some Israeli outlets noted that the province is home to the Natanz nuclear facility. Which has, of course, been attacked several times by the Israelis. And so I'll just point out, as far as, the accusation of the Mossad group, of a Mossad-linked group targeting Iran coming from Kurdistan, goes back to when we covered in March the Iranian ballistic missile strikes in Erbil against what they claim was a Mossad site, involved in a couple of drone attacks that occurred, quadcopter suicide drone attacks on drone facilities and buildings in Kermanshah and Tabriz, which had, the reports I saw about the attack in Tabriz indicated that some people were killed in those strikes. I don't believe anybody was killed in the Erbil strikes, and the strike in Kermanshah destroyed a significant portion of Iran's drone fleet. So there have been prior accusations about the Mossad operating against Iran in Kurdistan. So so now we have another story here. Iran IAEA cameras won't return until nuclear deal reached. This is from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com on July the 25th. So Tehran is saying that they won't turn back on the IAEA cameras that they have either removed or turned off until there is a new nuclear deal, or rather until the U.S. returns to its JCPOA commitments. Despite the fear-mongering by the IAEA and particularly the Director General Rafael Grossi, the Iranians are not interested in coming up with a new interim monitoring agreement with the UN watchdog. Their reasoning is that the purpose of the JCPOA itself was the monitoring of the Iranian nuclear program and proving their nuclear facilities are for peaceful purposes only. Therefore, until the accusations against them end, they will not make some deal to just pacify the agency and get the IAEA off their back. Additionally, there is reporting which indicates that there is some offer from the Iranians that those cameras could be turned back on if there is some concession on the part of the IAEA in regards to the controversial undeclared sites probe. If that issue and the West weaponization of it can be dispensed with, then there is indication that there's some things Iran would do in return to show good faith. And I have a little more on that as we go, as we move ahead. Okay, so Now we have another one. Defense Minister Benny Gantz says Israel can seriously harm and delay Iran's nuclear program. So Benny Gantz, the Israeli defense minister, continues his threats of war against Iran. During an interview at a Channel 13 conference in Jerusalem, Gantz said Iran is a global problem. It's not just Israel's private problem. He was asked if Israel can halt Iran's nuclear development or if they can only delay it. Gantz responded, "We are able to seriously harm and delay the nuclear program." Gantz also played down the possibility of the U.S. returning to the JCPOA, which he criticized as merely delaying Iran's nuclear program. The way they report this is kind of, I don't know exactly what he said. The way they described it in Times of Israel is they said he basically said that it would allow them. They were paraphrasing him, so it said that it would allow them to improve their economy and then legitimize their return to the nuclear program, after the deal expires. So I guess what he's, I'm presumably he's talking about weaponization. And so I wanted to make the point that even after the deal expires, for all the hype about that, of course, Iran will still be a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they haven't been shown to have violated since they signed it in 1970. So now, Times of Israel's report says, in regards to possible U.S. military intervention, Gantz pointed to remarks made by Biden himself earlier this month in which he said that as a last resort, the U.S. would use force to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. So indicating that the U.S. they're pretty confident in the U.S. Backing them up on whatever they choose to do. Now, I have another one here. Biden aid, highly unlikely. Iran nuclear deal will be revived soon. So this is at the end, again, getting closer to the end of the month here, last month in July. And the EU is working again to restart talks, that effort has been successful, at least. Not that a deal has been reached, but, we're as close as ever. And so as that was happening, and as Iran was showing themselves to be receptive and also ready to share their own new ideas about things that they could do to facilitate America's return to the JCPOA, the U.S. was immediately throwing cold water on the prospects of any deal being made. So the National Security Council Middle East coordinator, the White House's top Middle East official, Brett McGurk, said it was, quote, highly unlikely that a deal would be made anytime soon. So McGurk said he thinks Iran wants to put in their new ideas to improve the deal, but the U.S. is, quote, not going to do that. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said the deal on the table now is the final text. In an opinion piece for the Financial Times, Borrell said he has, quote, concluded the space for additional significant compromises, or concluded that the space for additional significant compromises has been exhausted. I have now put on the table a text that addresses in precise detail the sanctions lifting as well as the nuclear steps needed to restore the JCPOA, Borrell said. He said he has put a text on the table that addresses in details the steps needed to restore the JCPOA. Quote, this text represents the best possible deal that I, as facilitator of the negotiations, see as feasible, he wrote. I see no other comprehensive or effective alternative within reach. Borrell acknowledged that the Iran deal, quote, remains politically polarizing in Washington as the midterm elections approach, and that it, quote, may not have addressed all U.S. concerns with respect to Iran. He also acknowledged that there are, quote, serious reservations in Iran as well. But he argued that the deal carries very significant benefits. Quote, it's not a perfect agreement, but it addresses all essential elements and includes hard-won compromises by all sides, he wrote. If the deal is rejected, we risk a dangerous nuclear crisis set against the prospect of increased isolation for Iran and its people, Borrell wrote. It is our joint responsibility to conclude the deal. Okay, so here's another one from Dave DeCamp where Iran says it responded to the EU proposal aimed at reviving the nuclear deal. So Iran's lead negotiator, Ali Bagheri Khani, this is from July 31st, he has responded positively to the EU proposal to restart talks with an eye toward concluding a final deal. Quote, we shared our proposed ideas both on substance and form to pave the way for a swift conclusion of Vienna negotiations, Bagheri Khani wrote on Twitter. He added, Iran is ready to conclude the negotiations in short order, should the other side be ready to do the same. While the State Department said it was reviewing the EU foreign policy chief's proposal, the Wall Street Journal was already reporting at the time that the Biden administration is preparing to impose yet more sanctions on Iran. And predictably, they were saying that, it's going to be against Iran and those facilitating their oil sales to East Asia and the UAE and in China as well, right? So, as we've seen in this pattern in the last couple of months. So Blinken. Now here's another report from Jason Ditz. Blinken dodges question of U.S. returning to Iran talks. So while Tehran was saying they were optimistic about returning to talks based on Borrell's new text, Blinken was less than enthusiastic. Blinken attempted to establish a narrative that if the negotiations fail, it'll all be Iran's fault, saying it, quote, remains to be seen whether Iran is willing and able to move forward. So we remain prepared to move forward on the basis of what's been agreed. It's still unclear whether Iran is prepared to do that. Reuters characterized Blinken as sidestepping a question about whether Washington was prepared to return to the diplomatic table. He said, quote, the EU has put forward a best proposal based on many, many months of discussions, negotiations, conversations. It's very consistent with something they put forward in March that we agreed to that we would pursue in March, he told reporters when asked if Washington was ready to resume talks. On the same day, the U.S. announced their new sanctions. So this is from Dave DeCamp. The U.S. hits Iran with new sanctions targeting oil sales to East Asia. So the U.S. imposed these new sanctions against, they're targeting Iranian petrochemical and oil sales in East Asia, as one could have predicted. So as as Dave writes here, the new sanctions targeted 3 Chinese firms and 1 UAE firm accused of doing business with the Persian Gulf Petrochemical Industry Commercial Company, which the U.S. Treasury Department says is one of Iran's largest petrochemical brokers. According to the Treasury Department, the Persian Gulf Petrochemical Industry Commercial Company facilitated the sale of tens of millions of dollars worth of Iranian petroleum and petrochemical products from Iran to East Asia, through the firms that were hit with sanctions. The sanctions are the latest sign that the Biden administration is not serious about reviving the Iran nuclear deal. The Treasury Department said that until the JCPOA is revived, the U.S. will continue to enforce sanctions on the illicit sale of Iranian petroleum and petrochemicals. Okay, so hours after these sanctions were announced, the Iranians came out, and this was Mohammad Eslami, the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, came out and reiterated a similar claim that was made recently by one of Ayatollah Khamenei's aides, that Iran has the technical means to produce an atomic bomb, but has no intention of doing so. So he said the nation has the technical capability to produce an atomic bomb, but they have no intention to do so. As Jason reports here, top aide to Ayatollah Khamenei, Kamal Karzai, said the same thing last month. Islami would be in a better position to know the technical capacity of the nation. At the same time, an aide to the supreme leader would be in better position to know Iran's intentions, especially with Khamenei declaring nuclear arms to be haram or religiously forbidden to even attempt to acquire. And that's the crux of the nuclear dispute with Iran for years, as Iran works on a civilian capability that they absolutely have every right to, and the U.S. won't accept Iran's ruling out of weaponization, despite the vast majority of nuclear energy powers on the planet making similar decisions. Now, after the statement from Islami, a spokesman for the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran came out and clarified, saying Islami was misunderstood and misjudged by the media when he said that. He said Iran's strategic potential and military power is deterrent enough to repel any foreign threats, thus rendering it pointless for the country to design and develop nuclear weapons. And by the way, I made one mistake. I'll just correct myself here. This announcement did not come hours after the announcement of sanctions. That's another announcement about them activating new centrifuges. I'll get to that here in just a second. So the IAEA, this is another report. IAEA says good words are not enough. Iran must be transparent and compliant. So Rafael Grossi continues to fearmonger and build up hype around the Iranian nuclear program. He continues insisting they need to submit to a new monitoring agreement that would be larger and commensurate with the size of its civilian enrichment. Now, Grossi has been characterizing Iran's program as galloping ahead and says his agency lacks visibility into Iran's activities. Responding to Islami's comments, he says Tehran needs to prove to him that their program remains peaceful in nature. Quote, when it comes to nuclear, good words will not do it. What you need to do is be transparent and compliant and work with us. We are ready, and I hope they will be as well, Grassi told reporters at the UN. Though they have a very he says they have a very ambitious nuclear program that needs to be verified in the appropriate way. The program is moving ahead very, very fast, and not only ahead but sideways as well, because it's growing in ambition and in capacity. Now, Iran announced at the beginning of the month, hours after the sanctions were announced, the new American sanctions, that they had activated hundreds of centrifuges and had begun feeding gas into them, including some advanced IR-6 machines. As Al Jazeera reported, Behruz Kamalvandi, spokesman for the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, told state television Monday night that an order was given to begin feeding gas into hundreds of both first-generation IR-1 and advanced IR-6 machines. He said the IAEA was informed of the move, which, according to the spokesman, is in line with a December 2020 Parliament law that demanded increased uranium enrichment and using advanced machines until such a time that unilateral U.S. sanctions are lifted. Now, this came hours after Iran's foreign minister, Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, said Tehran is reviewing what was billed as a final proposed text by the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, last week to conclude negotiations that began in Vienna last April. So now this is from the 8th of August. Now this is EU submits final text of Iran deal negotiations over, from Jason Ditz. Now, the Borrell text gained enough momentum to bring U.S., Iranian, and EU officials to Vienna to reconvene the nuclear talks. The original format of the P4+1 and the U.S. Returned to the Austrian capital. It used to be the P5+1, but now the Americans haven't been in the deal since 2018. So the EU is moderating the negotiations as a go-between for both sides' top negotiators. After 4 days of negotiations, the EU submitted the final text of the agreement. All that's left to see is if the U.S. and Iran will accept it. Iran is optimistic. Their red line is having this issue of the undeclared sites, the uranium particles probe, resolved. According to Al Jazeera, Russian ambassador Mikhail Ulyanov told reporters outside Vienna's Palace Coburg on Sunday, we stand 5 minutes or 5 seconds from the finish line. He said there are 3 or 4 issues left to be resolved. They are sensitive, especially for Iranians and Americans, Ulyanov said. I cannot guarantee, but the impression is that we are moving in the right direction. Ulyanov also confirmed reception of the final text, saying if Tehran and Washington have no objections, then the JCPOA, as the deal is known, can be restored. Iran said that Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, the foreign minister, held a phone call with Joseph Borrell after the text was circulated, saying Iran's views and considerations were conveyed to the bloc, and Tehran expects seriousness from all sides to achieve an agreement. Iran has said the probe needs to be closed for into the undeclared sites for the JCPOA to be restored, but Western officials maintain that it's a separate issue from the nuclear deal. But there have been unconfirmed reports about the possibility of an agreement, as I said earlier, that would make sure the investigation wraps up, provided Iran fully cooperates with the nuclear watchdog. Western media reports have also quoted unnamed Western officials as saying Iran has abandoned its demand to take the IRGC off a U.S. terror list, the Foreign Terrorist Organization blacklist, instead agreeing to discuss the issue after an agreement has been reached on the JCPOA. Whereas Iranian state media has refuted this claim, saying Tehran has not abandoned any of its major positions in the negotiations that initially began last year. So, and as Jason says, Washington's intentions are still unclear. And regarding the undeclared sites probe, they'll probably want to keep it going for spite, if nothing else, because all the indications we've seen, of course, are that the U.S. doesn't want to return to the deal. And Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, has, the Iranians have been very upfront. They don't want, it's in their interest, and they already, I believe, ahead of schedule, provided full documentation on those sites and the small, the few particles of unprocessed uranium that were found there. And they've been very forthright and done everything on their end of the deal that was cut, I believe, back in March with Grossi. And yet he won't give up the probe. And it's used, of course, by the Americans, the Israelis, and the Europeans, usually just kind of following around and doing whatever the Americans are doing. It was used to censure them at this Board of Governors meeting a couple of months ago, and then led to this issue where the Iranians retaliated by disconnecting these cameras. So I think the Iranians have been very clear. I mean, they just want to get that off the table. But as I said, I don't think Washington will allow that to happen. Now, the EU now has said that they expect quick responses here on the whole deal. So we could be finding out if it's yay or nay here before long. So this is from Jason Ditz. EU expects quick responses on the Iran nuclear deal. If the deal is going to happen, it will likely happen soon. The U.S. says the Borrell deal is the only possible basis for an agreement, and Tehran has backed off some of its earlier demands. As Middle East Eye reports, the European Union says Iran and the United States are likely to respond very quickly to a final text that is aimed at salvaging the nuclear deal between Tehran and world powers. There is no more space for negotiations. Peter Stano, a foreign policy spokesman for the bloc, told journalists in Brussels on Tuesday, we have a final text, so it's the moment for a decision, yes or no. And we expect all participants to take this decision very quickly. A State Department spokesman has said that Washington is ready to quickly conclude a deal to revive the agreement based on the EU's proposals. Meanwhile, Iran says it will provide an answer to the proposal after studying the 25-page document. The state-run Islamic Republic news agency, IRNA, citing a foreign ministry official. All right, so that is all the JCPOA news. I have one last story before we wrap. This is the Justice Department claiming they hatched a plot by the IRGC to murder John Bolton. So the U.S. from Middle East Eye. U.S. accuses Iranian national plotting to assassinate John Bolton. So the U.S. has accused a member of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps plotting to kill Bolton, according to court documents that were unsealed Wednesday. The Justice Department said a U.S.-based 45-year-old named Shahram Poursafi, also known as Mehdi Rezahi, has offered to pay an individual in the U.S. $300,000 to kill Bolton. The Justice Department said the plan was likely set in retaliation for the U.S. killing of Qasem Soleimani, the top Iranian general leader of the Quds Force, in January 2020. Matthew Olson, the U.S. Assistant Attorney General, said, "This is not the first time we have uncovered Iranian plots to exact revenge against individuals on U.S. soil, and we will work tirelessly to expose and disrupt every one of these efforts." Previously, Tony Blinken has made a huge deal out of these baseless claims that the IRGC allegedly is trying to assassinate Mike Pompeo or Brian Hook. I mean, it's not to say that that's impossible, but that they haven't provided any evidence. And of course, the American taxpayer, I believe, pays $2 million every month to give those guys full security detail. Now, according for like 24 hours a day. Now, according to the charges, the report says that Poursafi tried to arrange Bolton's murder beginning in October of last year, when he contacted online an unidentified person in the U.S., first saying he wanted to commission photographs of Bolton. That person passed the Iranian on to another contact, whom Poursafi then asked to kill Bolton. He offered him $250,000, which was then negotiated up to $300,000. Poursafi added that he had an additional job for which he would pay $1 million, the Justice Department said. But that second person, court documents say, was a confidential source for the FBI. Now, the ostensible assassin stalled, waiting for an initial payment, but only in late April did Poursafi send money, paying a total of $100 in cryptocurrency. So Poursafi was charged with the use of interstate commerce facilities in the commission of murder for hire, which brings up to 10 years in prison, and with providing and attempting to provide material support to a transnational murder plot, which carries a 15-year sentence. The court documents indicated that Bolton was aware of the plot and cooperated with investigators, allowing photographs of himself outside his Washington office to be sent to Poursafi. Over the months, Poursafi discussed the plot with his U.S. contact, and he allegedly disclosed that it was related to Tehran's desire for revenge over the killing of Soleimani. And in a statement, Bolton thanked the Justice Department and the FBI and blasted Iran's government as liars, terrorists, and enemies of the United States. So, I mean, this sounds very suspicious to me. It reminds me very much of a plot they recently supposedly uncovered in Texas over somebody who was trying to kill George W. Bush. That again involved confidential informants and people and stuff like this. So we'll have to take a look at it. The idea that the guy was willing to pay upwards of $1.5 million or or $1.3 million for these jobs, and then all he could muster up was after a long time, apparently, was $100 in cryptocurrency. The whole thing seems very suspicious, and so I'll look more into that and probably write something about it here coming up soon. But yeah, I mean, we're very close. On apparently reaching a deal. I think basically it comes down to whether or not the U.S. will say yes or no. And I don't see how you could look at what's happened over the last, since Biden came into office, and think that they would say yes. But who knows? I do, suspect, of course, that with these recent arms sales to, the State Department has approved them. They haven't gone through yet. But to the Saudis and the UAE. They seem very lukewarm on this idea of building a NATO-style alliance in the Middle East targeting Iran with Israel. So they may have just squeezed these out of Biden, but I mean, the State Department has approved more than $5 billion in arms sales and missile defense systems, Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia, and then THAAD missiles to Abu Dhabi. And I don't know if that that obviously was something that they wanted anyway, but it could indicate that there was some sort of backdoor sort of agreement that they would move forward incrementally, at least on this alliance with Israel. But we've also covered here before how they're reluctant to really do that, to move forward on that alliance for a number of reasons. Because I think as hawkish as the UAE is on the Iran deal, I don't think they've totally decided that they want to be, permanently, at odds with Iran. There's been indications that we've talked about before of burgeoning diplomacy, certainly between the Saudis and the Iranians, with the talks that have been brokered by Baghdad, but also the UAE. And recently, I guess there was another call held by Hossein Amir Abdollahian and his counterpart in the UAE about increasing cooperation and economic activity. So it'll, it's kind of up in the air, but I don't think obviously Biden will return to the deal, and we continue to see more sanctions, and I think just more sanctions on these companies that are based in the UAE that are doing business with Iran shows that I think that there's probably at least the Americans and the Israelis, I think at their insistence, as we know, are very concerned about, other states getting closer to Iran, even just in trade in the region. But also, I think it signals that the Americans don't want to return to the deal. And then this piece about this story about Bolton, the IRGC trying to kill Bolton, which sounds ridiculous, is just perfectly timed. I guess we'll have to see how much the Democrats exploit that to justify their decision one way or another, whether or not to join the deal.
All right, Connor, thanks so much for coming back on the show. I'm sure you'll be back on next week to do another Iran update, and everybody keep an eye on the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com for mine and Connor's work. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks, Kyle.